It wasn't until college that I really started to get Christmas. Before that, I was into the decorations and the gifts, of course, but it wasn't the holiday I looked forward to the way I do now. It was just fine. But when I got to college, everything changed. My friends and I decided to take Christmas to the next level. We went all out. It wasn't about just wearing ugly sweaters or going to some half-hearted office party. We built our own traditions, throwing over-the-top holiday parties each year. Each one got wilder, crazier, and more ridiculous than the last. A few years ago, my fiancé and I dressed up as Krampus and a twisted version of Santa. Scary enough to make anyone second-guess their holiday cheer. Last year, he went as a zombie snowman, and I was a possessed Christmas tree. We didn't just dress up, we became Christmas. But this story, this is the one that turned everything upside down. The Christmas party that spiraled into something much darker than I ever expected. It was about 6 years ago. I was still single, living the carefree life of a 20-something with no real responsibilities. My friend Bella, who had just gotten married that summer, was hosting her first big Christmas party at her gorgeous new house. I'm talking about the kind of place you see in Hallmark movies. Sprawling lawn, lights twinkling on every surface, a fireplace crackling in every room. Bella's husband, Mark, was a successful lawyer, and she worked in finance. Needless to say, they were living the good life, and it showed. The house was picture-perfect for the holiday season. For our group, Christmas wasn't just about the decorations. It was about the theme. Every year, we picked something crazy for our costumes, and this year, we decided to go with a twisted take on classic Christmas characters. I went as the gingerbread girl, except, instead of the usual sweet, cute cookie, I was a bloody, half-baked corpse with candy canes sticking out of my body like impaled shrapnel. It was gross, sure, but also a lot of fun to put together. I loved the attention. After all, I'd spent hours making sure every detail was perfect, from the blood-stained apron to the decayed bits of candy. The party was in full swing, everyone mingling and laughing. But there was something about that night that felt off. Maybe it was just the odd energy that always comes with a big holiday gathering, but I kept noticing this one person standing in the corner of the living room. They were wearing a red hoodie, baggy jeans, and this cheap Santa mask. Nothing too special, nothing that screamed danger. But it was the way they were looking at me. Not just a quick glance, but like they were studying me, watching me. It wasn't subtle. It was unsettling. I tried to shake it off, brushing it aside as just another weird party moment. But every time I turned around, there they were, near the hallway by the Christmas tree, standing so still like they were waiting for something. My stomach twisted a little each time I saw them. It wasn't just a casual glance. It felt intentional, like they were following me but without moving. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I kept mingling, trying to enjoy the party. After all, it was Christmas, right? No one wants to be the person who kills the vibe by freaking out over something minor. But that nagging feeling stayed with me. The night dragged on, and I kept seeing the same person, always lurking in the background, always watching. I couldn't escape the feeling that something wasn't right. When I finally found Bella to ask her about it, she was way too tipsy to be much help. So I did what anyone would do. I ignored it and kept partying. It's Christmas, after all. But then, at midnight, everything went sideways. Bella's house had a basement with a side door that led to the backyard. I volunteered to help clean up, so I went downstairs to drop off some trash. The basement was empty, and for a moment the quiet felt nice. I stood there for a second, just listening to the muffled noise of the party upstairs. Then I heard something. It was faint but unmistakable, the shuffle of footsteps behind me. My heart skipped. I froze, hoping I was imagining it. When I turned around, there was no one there. I chalked it up to my nerves, grabbed another load of trash, and went back upstairs. But when I came back down again, something felt wrong. The basement door, which I had left wide open, was now closed. I assumed it was just the wind, so I opened it again. But the moment I stepped outside, I froze. There, standing by the side of the house, was the same person in the Santa mask. They didn't move. They just stood there eerily still. I could feel a chill creep down my spine, like someone had turned the temperature down a few degrees. I don't know how, but I knew they had seen me. I didn't stick around to find out. I turned slowly, backing up toward the door, trying to stay quiet. But just as my hand brushed the door handle, they lunged. They moved faster than I ever would have expected, grabbing me with a strength I didn't think was possible. Panic hit me all at once. My heart raced, and my fingers fumbled as I tried to break free. I screamed, but the noise of the party inside drowned me out. My thoughts were a blur, just pure, raw fear. I managed to slip free for a second, but they were relentless. They grabbed me again, pulling me toward the darkness. That's when Mark appeared. I had no idea how he saw me, but I'll never forget the look of fury on his face as he ran out the back door, tackling the person to the ground. The breath left their body with a heavy thud as they hit the grass, but they didn't stop fighting. Bella came out, already on the phone with the police, her voice shaky as she described the situation. When Mark ripped the mask off, I was in shock. Underneath, it wasn't some man in a creepy costume. It was a woman, someone I didn't recognize. Her face was twisted in a mix of rage and terror, her eyes wide with something darker than fear. She was shaking, crying, and it was clear she wasn't in a good place mentally. The police showed up a few minutes later. As they cuffed her, Bella asked if I knew her. I didn't. I had never seen her before in my life. Turns out she'd recently gone through a brutal breakup. Somehow, she'd convinced herself I was the woman her ex-husband had started dating. She'd found me on social media, figured out I was at Bella's party, and decided to confront me in the most terrifying way she could. She'd even found out we shared the same name, a random coincidence that set off this whole nightmare. What she planned to do that night, I'll never know, but I'm thankful I didn't find out. That Christmas, the one I thought I'd remember for all the wrong reasons, became the holiday I'll never forget. I'll never forget that Christmas Eve, the one that completely flipped everything on its head. It started like any other, cold, snowy, and with that slight buzz of excitement in the air. But somehow that night, something felt wrong from the get-go. I can still picture it. The old truck, my Uncle Leo at the wheel, and the mountains stretching out in front of us, dark and endless. It was supposed to be a simple trip to drop off some firewood, something we did every year. But this time, things just didn't line up. I was barely 14, still a kid in a lot of ways. I didn't have much say in what happened. But there I was, out in the middle of nowhere with my father and my uncle, hauling firewood in the freezing cold. The trees looked like dark giants looming over us as the truck's headlights barely cut through the thick snow. Uncle Leo, of course, didn't care much about things like responsibility or the schedule. He never did. So, even though we were supposed to head to town for the holiday celebration, he had other plans. "We're getting the wood first," he said. My dad didn't say much. He never did when it came to Leo. I guess he figured it was easier to just roll with it. The snow was deeper than usual, and the trees seemed heavier that night. I remember lifting one of the logs, and for a second, I thought I saw something shift in the shadows, just out of the corner of my eye. You know the feeling when you get the sense that something's there, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That feeling didn't go away, no matter how hard I tried to shake it off. Then it happened. I was carrying this huge log when my hand slipped. I don't know if it was the cold or the slick snow, but suddenly I lost my grip. The chainsaw, which had been buzzing in the background all night, swam out of control. It happened so fast. Before I could even react, the blade hit my leg. The pain was instant. It wasn't dull, more like a sharp shock that shot up my leg as if the world had just paused for a second before everything came rushing back. I remember the snow crunching beneath me as I stumbled, almost falling over. I don't remember much after that. Just the cold, the way everything felt distant. My mind was fuzzy, my leg throbbing, but what stuck with me the most was how still everything was. The trees, the snow, the air. It was like the world had just gone silent. The blood was warm, but it spread too fast, soaking into my pants. I looked around, expecting to see my dad, but he wasn't there. Couldn't hear his voice. Uncle Leo, of course, had wandered off into the woods to take a piss, leaving me there, bleeding out in the snow. Felt like I was alone out there, like the woods were closing in. The minutes seemed to stretch, each one heavier than the last. But then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard the crunch of snow behind me. I turned my head. My father was there, his face pale, eyes wide with panic. He dropped down beside me, his hands shaking as he reached for my leg. "Stay with me, son," he said, his voice rough, like he was holding himself together just to get the words out. I could barely whisper, but I managed to choke out. "Where's Leo?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes darted around, scanning the dark trees like he was trying to find Leo. I could see it in his face. He wasn't really looking for Leo. He was just trying to keep me from falling apart. "Don't worry about Leo," he muttered, but I could tell he wasn't really talking to me. He was just trying to convince himself. But then, just as my dad was trying to figure out what to do, Leo stumbled out of the woods. He was laughing, completely oblivious to the mess he'd left behind. He had a bottle in one hand and a grin on his face, like everything was just fine. He looked down at me and then back at my dad, still laughing. "Kid's going to be fine," Leo said, clapping me on the back as if I hadn't just nearly bled out in the snow. "Let's get moving." My dad didn't even flinch. He just looked at Leo, looked at me, and then said, "We need to get to a hospital." Leo shrugged it off like it was no big deal. "Hospitals? We've got more important things to do," he muttered, still grinning. "Christmas isn't waiting for us, is it?" And that's when it happened. My dad, the one who always had a calm, steady hand, let Leo drive. Couldn't believe it. We were hurtling down that mountain, bumping and swerving, not from the poor suspension, but from something else, something deeper. The truck felt wrong. The air outside was colder now, the snow starting to fall faster, heavier. Every stop we made along the way at some dive bar just added to the absurdity of it all. Leo would swagger in, order a drink, and then announce that everything was fine. My leg was still bleeding, and my dad wasn't stopping him. Not once. At one point, I tried to speak up. I wanted to say something, anything, to make them understand how bad it was. But all I could do was sit there, feeling my body growing colder, watching Leo make light of everything. The bartender even offered me a beer, looking at me like I was the punchline of some twisted joke. Finally, we made it to the hospital. My leg was stitched up, but there was something else that needed fixing. The air between my dad and Leo was thick, silent. It wasn't just about the injury. It was something deeper, something about how Leo always skated by while my dad had to pick up the pieces again and again. That Christmas, everything shifted. We were still family, but the cracks were becoming harder to ignore. And for me, I realized that surviving wasn't just about the pain in your body. It's about the weight of the things you carry inside. That night, I learned that sometimes the world isn't as safe as we think it is. Some things aren't accidents, they're reckonings. And sometimes, even Christmas can be scarier than a nightmare. It was a Christmas evening in 2012, and at the time I was about 16 or 17 years old. My mom and I were on our way home after a long, fun day with our extended family in Greater London. As we drove, the hum of the car engine was the background to our conversation. At first, we talked about how much we enjoyed Christmas and the funny stories shared with family. But then the conversation shifted to Santa Claus, and from there we started talking about other holiday characters like the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy, joking about how magical these stories felt when I was younger. As we talked, I brought up a memory from my childhood. My mom used to keep my baby teeth in a small jar with a blue fairy sitting on top. It was a delicate jar, and I could picture it so clearly, the bright blue fairy with wings perched on the lid. I told my mom how much I used to love that jar. It always felt special, like it held a bit of magic from my childhood. But as I spoke, I realized I hadn't seen it in years. I remembered the last time I saw the jar. It had black duct tape wrapped around it, probably to keep it from opening by accident. If I had to guess, I'd say that was years ago, maybe around 2007, about 5 years earlier, when we were packing to move house. We talked for a while about baby teeth in the jar. My mom said she hadn't seen it in a long time either, and hoped it hadn't been lost during the house move. We both felt a little sad thinking it might be gone, but we weren't sure. I thought it was a bit gross that my mom had kept all my teeth and that they were just sitting somewhere in the house. We laughed about it and kept talking for a while before moving on to another topic. Not long after, we arrived home and walked through the front door, greeting our dog, as we always did. My mom headed into the kitchen, and I followed right behind her. And there, on the kitchen floor, was the small jar. It was broken into 2 pieces, and all the tiny baby teeth were scattered across the floor. At first, I thought my mom was trying to scare me, even though she had never played a prank on me in her entire life. But when I looked at her face, I realized she wasn't behind it, and she was just as shocked as I was. That's when I knew this wasn't her doing. Without wasting a second, she grabbed her phone and started calling everyone she could think of. Friends, family, anyone, to tell them what had happened. Meanwhile, I stood there staring at the mess on the floor. How had the jar ended up here right after we had just been talking about it? My dog, Pika, was already pretty old at the time, probably around 11 years, and she was very calm and well-behaved. When we weren't home, she would mostly just nap or quietly wait for us to come back. She never went through our belongings or caused any kind of mess. In fact, it wasn't even possible for her to get into most of our stuff since everything was stored in drawers or cupboards that she couldn't reach, even if she tried. I looked around the kitchen, trying to make sense of it all. How could the jar, which I hadn't seen in years, suddenly appear here, broken and scattered on the floor? And why now, just after we'd been talking about it? Felt so bizarre and completely unexplainable. I still can't figure out how it happened or what caused it. It's one of those moments that stays with you no matter how much time passes. My mom married my stepdad when I was around 8 years old, and after they got married, my mom and I moved into my stepdad's house, which was on a large piece of land, about 20 acres. It was just the 3 of us. My mom, my stepdad, and me. We had 2 big dogs at the time of this event. We lived in that house for 14 years, and I saw a lot of strange things during that time. But among all those moments, there was one story that sticks out the most, one that I'll never forget. I was about 10 years old, though I don't remember my exact age. I just remember the present I got that year. At that age, I could use the bathroom by myself at night, but I was still young enough that my mom would usually come check on me anyway. So, it was Christmas Eve, and the house was decorated for the holidays, with colorful lights and garlands. But the house was quieter than usual, so I could hear every little creak. That's when the story begins. Our Christmas tree was always turned off at night, except on Christmas Eve. When you walked in through the front door, you were right in the living room. Straight ahead was what we called the hall, but really it was just a small rectangle with doors on 3 of the 4 sides. From the front door and living room, you could see straight into the bathroom. When you walked toward the bathroom, there was a closet on the left side, and next to that was the bathroom door on the right. Then you'd see my bedroom door, a small empty section of wall about the size of a door, and then my parents' bedroom door. The kitchen was just off to the left of the living room and shared a wall with the bathroom and closet. We also had an unfinished basement that was a bit creepy, with wooden stairs leading down to it from the living room, near the kitchen and back porch. The basement was mostly used for storage, and I didn't like going down there by myself. So, it was Christmas Eve, and I got out of bed, walked out of my bedroom, and turned the corner to go into the bathroom. Of course, I had to take a quick look at the Christmas tree and the presents under it. I thought I saw a monster truck. I was a big fan of monster trucks back then and really wanted a remote control one. But I didn't stop to check because I really needed to go to the bathroom. After I finished in the bathroom, I got up and looked toward the living room again. I really wanted to get a better look at my presents before going back to sleep. In my house growing up, we didn't close the doors unless we had guests over. So from where I was sitting, I could see the front door and the glow of the Christmas tree. I turned to flush the toilet, and when I looked back up at the doorway between the hallway and the living room, I saw the shadow of a boy. He looked about my age from his height, but he had his back to me, so I couldn't see his face. He was standing in the doorway, using his left hand to hold on to the doorframe while he leaned into the living room on his tiptoes to look at the presents. In his right hand, he was holding a red lollipop. His whole body looked dark because there wasn't much light, and the Christmas lights were shining behind him. I moved closer to the edge of the bathroom so that I was just inside the doorway. If I had stretched out my arm, I could have touched him. I was standing there, about to ask him what he was doing, when he slowly came back down onto his flat feet and started to turn toward me. As he began to turn, I suddenly felt this intense feeling of dread, fear, and worry. I could see the side of his face, and he was just smiling, staring straight ahead. Right before he fully turned around, my mom came out of her room and asked if I was okay. In the split second that I looked at my mom and then back at the boy, he was gone. I pointed toward the living room, and my mom thought I was just trying to peek at the presents, so she tucked me back into bed. I fell asleep quickly and completely forgot about it. The next morning, I did get my remote control monster truck that year. It wasn't until years later that I remembered and told my mom about it. She wasn't surprised because, like I said, a lot of strange things happened in that house. This happened in 2015. I had just moved to a small house far from my hometown the year before, so I was still getting used to the area and hadn't met many people yet. I worked from home as well, which made it even harder to connect with others. Anyway, for Christmas, I had no plans at all. My family was too far away, and I didn't have enough vacation time to go out and see them, so this was actually going to be my first Christmas alone. On Christmas Eve, I stayed up working, figuring I'd just get ahead on some things, so I didn't have to worry about doing anything on Christmas Day. I was working in the living room, listening to music when, through my earbuds, I thought I heard something coming from outside. I pulled one of the earbuds out and listened, but didn't hear anything else. Shrugging it off, I got up and looked around. With the earbuds still in, it was hard to know what direction the sound had come from, but I was pretty sure it was outside the house, not inside. I looked out the back window, not seeing anything, then moved to the front window and again saw nothing. But then, as I looked out the front door, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. On the porch were a set of shoe prints in the snow. They led right up to my doorstep and then back out toward the driveway. There was no mail dropped off, no package, nothing, just the shoe prints. It was really strange, and my heart started to race as I tried to figure out why anyone would be walking up to my doorstep at 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve. I made sure the door was locked and went back to work, trying to shake off the unease. Eventually, I got into bed, but it felt strange waking up on Christmas morning, like it was any other day. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat in my chair to watch TV. I think I spent the whole morning just sitting there watching shows and movies, occasionally checking my phone. I called my parents and talked to them for a bit, but that was really all I did. I thought about going out, but the cold air and strong wind kept me inside for the day. By 6 p.m., I had basically done nothing all day and made myself some dinner, planning to go to bed early. But then, I heard it again. The shuffling sound of footsteps in the snow, coming toward the front door. I froze, sitting quietly, knowing nobody should be here. After a few seconds, the footsteps sounded again, walking away from the house. I went up and checked, seeing almost an identical scene to what I'd seen the previous night. The shoe prints in the snow were back, exactly where they had been before. My stomach churned. After that, I forced myself to stay up later. I kept my eyes open until probably around 10 p.m., though I guess I fell asleep on the couch eventually. I remember getting really tired and trying to stay awake, but I hadn't planned on falling asleep out there. When I woke up, the TV was still on, flashing light throughout the dark room. I sat up and paused it, my eyes adjusting to the dim glow. Then, I got up to go to my bedroom, but as I walked down the hallway, my eyes instantly locked on my bedroom door. It was open, but I always kept it closed. I walked over and pushed it open wider, then flicked on the light. What I saw inside stopped my heart. Wet shoe prints were scattered around the floor, going to and from the window. My body went cold, and my mind raced. I stood there, frozen in shock, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I spun around and turned on the hallway light, hoping maybe I was imagining it. But no, more shoe prints led down the hallway toward the living room. I followed them, but they stopped right outside the living room, looking like they turned and went back, right after seeing me on the couch. The shoe prints were nowhere else in the house. I didn't know what to think, and I didn't know what to do. I called the police, but they didn't offer much help. The current theory was that the man had come by the previous 2 nights to see if I was home, and after not answering the door, he likely thought I was away for the holidays. He probably thought he could rob me while I was gone. But the fact that I had been home, sleeping while all of this happened, it was deeply disturbing. Whoever it was, they never came back.